Today on Conversation Matters, I'm here with my great new friend, Chris Ortolano, out of Portland. So we're coming to you from down in the South, Mississippi, up and all the way up in Portland. And Chris and I got to know each other through a mutual friend recently. And his background is he's the founder of Outbound, has a really a vibrant group on Slack called Sales Stack. And has all been around. I mean, you know, he's taught me so much about or formalizing my passion around sales enablement, sales development, and now really moving into market development, and has a really unique, just what he's been talking about lately in light of this crazy times that we find ourselves in. What do we do? And what I love also about Chris is that he's positive and he's all about, you know, what do we do? Not freaking out on where we are, but where do we go? And that, I love that spirit. And anyway, Chris, thanks for being on Conversation Matters.
Thank you, Joe. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, good. Well, we'll start by maybe, you know, quickly, you know, your background and how you've evolved, and then where you and I started, which is just your thoughts on where we are. And as you always like to say, shift happens. Maybe expand upon that a little bit.
Yeah, well, like you, I'm a recovering accountant, and I'm very data-driven. And when we were forced to reconcile with this global pandemic, I realized there was an opportunity to look at market trends and look for new opportunities, because I feel like there are a lot of opportunities out there if we just open our eyes and lean into these new markets. That's really important, but a lot of folks don't know how to do that, right? They're just trained to essentially put their heads down and do the same old marketing or sales campaign. So I wanted to borrow a quote from an acquaintance of mine. His name is Manny Medina. He's the CEO of a company called Outreach.io. And this week at his virtual conference, he said, you need to find your pivot, move fast, and let your customers guide you.
That's great. All three.
All three. You need to do all three simultaneously, and that is not easy. 2 out of 3 is good, but not good enough. And so we can talk a little bit about how we can do this in these times to stay positive, move forward, and find new opportunity.
That's great. That's great. And maybe what I think, you know, from my background, it's always been around Conversation Matters, right? That's the name of this podcast. I love it. I mean, I believe it. I think it's our greatest asset. But you know, when I've done talks on conversation and the art of conversation, it's obviously the oldest form of communication technology way back. No matter when we think the world began, it was the first way we communicated, two-way communication, you know, on smoke signals and walls. But conversation, you know, I always say is so important and so valuable. But when you look at the art of conversation, I always, you know, and how we built our company is on the 4 kind of pillars, right? You got to listen. You got to study, listen to what conversations you want to be a part of. Number 2, you got to then go figure out what to say. Then you have to actually deploy it out of your mouth or on your computer if it's an email. And then lastly, you have to analyze, did that work, right? Listen, create, deploy, analyze. And so what's been fun, and maybe expand upon what you and I've been talking a lot about, is, of course, to even have a conversation, right? You have to go study and listen, right? And how do you do that? When you talk about market development, maybe expand upon that a little bit. I love that, because that's what I think about when I think of doing your homework or listening before you act.
Absolutely, yeah. So market development is really related to the concept of customer development. So when you first start to build a product, every book tells you to create a customer development survey and ask people what the problem is. Not if they're interested in the product that you're starting to develop, but what problems are they trying to solve? Maybe it's a messaging problem, right? And Slack, which is a really interesting company, originally was a gaming company. And they built their own messaging hub because they couldn't find anything else. And then the messaging hub was more popular than the gaming company they were working on. So they pivoted, right? But along the way, they built an incredible customer development ecosystem, and they were listening constantly. And I think that's really what we have to do in order to do market development. We have to use other people's content, maybe a little bit of our own content, to engage people in business. That is, what are the market forces? What are the market opportunities? And then we can lead lead into a more of a business conversation. In these times, everybody wants to talk about markets. It's an easy conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And I always like to say you have two kinds of content when you want to go out there and reach out to someone, no matter what you're selling. And as we all know, we're all are selling something. I think that's also been fascinating. I mean, there's true B2B sales. People know they're salespeople, but everybody's a salesperson, even the small independent business owner. And really, there's two types of content. You can either talk about yourself, right, and give your pitch, or you can talk about them and have what you always talk about, and our good friend Sean talks about, that business acumen, that market acumen. So there's really those two types of content. And it is, to me, the traditional marketer would like to typically talk about what they're marketing, right? As opposed to salespeople, I think, genuinely know if they frisk their soul, it's really, how do I talk about them? How do I do my homework about your market? You know, and you're talking about, you and I've talked about a lot about, which has been fascinating, is what markets do I go after right now? Right, this is a crazy time. Well, there's no trade shows, there's no sales meetings, there's no dinners, and none of that exists. I mean,
well, budgets are frozen for
budgets are frozen. So
a lot of B2B SaaS companies, right? So you can
right,
knock on those doors, but are they even going to open?
exactly. So talk a little bit more about, that sort of that first step of, where do I go? Where do I lean into? What markets do I go after? Because I could be spinning my wheels. I'm probably not going to call on people in hospitality right now.
Yeah, probably not going to convert for you.
Yeah.
So you have to be open-minded, but you also need to be systematic. So I call that flaring out. So imagine a big whiteboard and you jot down all these different ideas and then honing in. And you and I were on a call about 3 weeks ago with Sean Shepard where we talked about telehealth.
Yeah.
So I happen to have a little bit of knowledge about healthcare, and I found some information that created a map, essentially a market map of 9 different subverticals with regards to telehealth. And then I created a process called the Agile Market Assessment, which allowed me to sort of quickly hone in on market forces. These are macroeconomic factors, and then market trends, and then companies within those trends. And I was quickly able to basically stack, rank, and score half a dozen different companies, and from there create account briefs and stakeholder briefs. So it's not that hard to start to analyze trends if you have a system in place. And you do need a tool, you do need a data aggregation tool like Soundboard to help you to normalize those trends. Otherwise you can kind of get spun out and a little bit pulled left and right. And so the process of using Soundboard plus an Agile Market Assessment allows you to parse the signal from the noise.
Yeah. And what are a couple of those industries, I guess, you're looking at? Telehealth, of course, is one, but what for the audience, what are 2 or 3 that are pretty obvious to you?
Yeah, so because of this crisis with the coronavirus, people don't want to essentially participate in face-to-face contact. So a couple of obvious sectors are education technology, known as ed tech, right? Because many academic programs, K through 12 university, are not sure if their students are going to be coming back in the fall. It's just too soon for those institutions to take on that risk. So if you've used any kind of remote education technology, the range of education experience can go from low to high, right? And in countries like India right now, ed tech is taking off because they know that education is the pathway to success, and they cannot miss 2 or 3 months of schooling, right? But if you haven't participated in the Indian markets before, you've got to know who the players are. You've got to know who the leaders are. You've got to know where the different subverticals are. And using Soundboard, we can start to map those subverticals in a new market, in an emerging market. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, it's risky, right? You can't just put all your eggs in that basket. So you've got to look at other sectors as well. One that we're more familiar with is e-commerce. Because again, people are afraid of going to brick and mortars. Brick and mortar companies are now pivoting to provide an e-commerce solution. And one of the things they're looking at is this concept of a concierge online who actually comes into your shopping experience via a video and helps you make decisions. Because if there's too much friction, there's an empty shopping cart, and you and your customer are both left unsatisfied.
Right, a much fancier chatbot. right? I mean,
Well, you could schedule a meeting, you can chat, you can go to live chat, you can go to live video. There's all these different
yeah,
permutations. Now, the question is, which industries within e-commerce are poised to take advantage of that, right?
yeah,
We don't know yet. We still have to do the research. And one of the ways I do that is I talk to e-commerce companies. I talk to people who sell into e-commerce companies. And I start to normalize the trends with other news sources as well. Now, this is not something I just do 15 or 20 minutes a day, but with a proper process and a good set of tools, you don't have to spend more than 15 or 20 minutes a day. Once it's all set up for you.
yep, yeah. Well, that's why, while the people ask, what do we do? I can say, we give you what to say. We give you your homework, right? We would make, but really what we're doing is making it what would take you more hours than you have in a day into minutes, right?
That's right.
Within minutes, you have business acumen. Within
Yeah.
minutes, you have market, and you understand in minutes what are the key topics about like you and I talked about remote patient monitoring. Well, I mean, where do you start, right? Well, we give it to
We
you.
can help.
We can
We
help you.
can help.
Yeah, yeah.
And all we're asking for is 20 minutes of your day, right?
Yep.
And I can tell you the differential between what you bring when you're in a sales conversation versus somebody who hasn't done that is an order of magnitude, right?
Yeah.
It's vastly different because you bring market intelligence to the conversation.
Yeah.
And that is of value to your potential customers. They want to know where markets are heading. Just like in the old days when we used to hop on a plane and carry a bag, we would carry market intelligence with us and exchange that for account intelligence.
Well, what I've gathered talking to you in our last month or so is I've always been one, and I'm pretty passionate about what I believe. But I think when we talk about the me content, I call it the me content or the them content, right? The me content is, of course, you got to get to me eventually because I got to pitch you on something I'm selling. But it's
Right.
about the them content, and that them content, is really twofold. It's what we're talking about, the market. Me understanding your market, me having some intelligence about what you do and what you struggle with and what and then it's also what I think a lot of salespeople know. It's about also knowing that, hey, Jenny, right, the woman I'm trying to sell to loves golf or loves wine, right? So there's that kind of content too, and that's of course any salesperson knows if I'm going to go try to sell this person over here and they love Oregon track, I'm going to talk about Oregon track, right? Or about here Ole Miss football or whatever. Those are clear. Those are, I mean, any good salesperson knows that. But I
Yeah.
think what we forget sometimes, and that's super important, and I'm big on that, and Soundboard has that. But I think today, what's going to get you the greatest attention today, because everybody's thinking like everybody's going, what do I do in sales? Well, the most powerful thing, priority in them content is let them know something about their business, right?
Yeah.
Because they're changing too, right? They need help, and so I think that's, again, I like to say, me content, them content, but that them content is content about the market and just, to me the
Here's
most
here's the thing, Joe. You can close a deal with market acumen,
yeah,
but you've got to create what I call a soundboard sandwich.
yeah, yeah, I like
And we
that.
need to create 2 parts them content to 1 part me content.
There you go. I like that. I
Yeah.
like
And that sandwich is very easy once you get it in your playbook. And then they see that you know where the markets are heading and that you're willing to partner with them, not just close them.
yeah, yeah,
And that's what people are really looking for right now, are partners. And I'll give you a quick story.
yeah,
So resilience and business resilience is a very common theme right now for senior executives who don't want to suffer another catastrophe.
yeah,
And so there's a number of ways to be resilient. One of them is to essentially develop a new line of business or service to go beyond your core products, right? So I was on a call with a bunch of senior leaders, and a gentleman was talking about this, and I had written a piece about how to stay resilient, how businesses need to stay resilient. And I just connected with him on LinkedIn using that post that I had written.
yeah,
Lo and behold, he had written a post on business resilience as well. And so from there, we took it off LinkedIn, we took it to email, He shared more of his content. I shared more of mine. Now we're going to set up a phone call.
Yeah.
And it was very natural. It was almost as if we were in the same room. And of course, now he wants to know about the Agile market assessments, right? That's the next conversation. But I didn't lead with me content. I led with them content.
Yeah, yeah. And that's we always say again, going back to conversation being an asset or the lack thereof, a liability, right? I mean, and what is the fuel? The fuel is content. And the best fuel, I mean, not to get too many analogies, the high octane, right, is the them content, right?
Yeah, and when you pair that with a couple of good questions,
yeah.
if you can ask good questions about them content, you might as well just, retire early, because that's the easiest way to start a conversation. It's amazing. But so many of us haven't been trained to ask these good questions. And you have to steep yourself in the markets to know what questions. And Soundboard is a great way to get your foot in the door.
Well, one thing I was thinking about, I always tell my kids, and my father taught me this, and I look back, and realize more and more how much I am like my father, which is crazy. But is, the best question we can all ask everybody during this time is, how are you? Right? I mean, it's one of the best three most powerful words, most powerful medicine. How are you? And that's why we have counseling. That's why people want to know. People want to be asked, how are you? And in a lot of ways, that's, how are you? Hey, I've been thinking about this. Hey, I see this strategy. And, the kind of how are you was through that business resilience kind of common theme. And y'all had a conversation, right?
You know of a gentleman named Chris Marin. He's with Convertus.
Yep. Yeah.
So he and I were on a webinar, and he came up with the concept of the introduction dialogue.
I love that.
Yeah, which is essentially asking, how are you, over a series of emails and waiting for them to reply in an authentic way.
Yeah.
And because you do that, it's easier to then transition into a business conversation. And you use third-party content to ask, how are you?
I love it. That's very powerful. Well, that's neat. And then what was the other one we talked about real quickly? We get ed tech. Just think about, and I know you and I are working on trying to bundle some neat things together in some of these areas, but ed tech, telehealth.
And the other thing is that healthcare is now changing quickly to respond, right? So beyond the telehealth, there's a bunch of new health data, right? That data can be related to your EMR, your electronic medical record, or medical devices such as thermometers that people are now essentially connecting to the cloud. And because that data is so valuable, companies are now vulnerable and have to deploy new cybersecurity solutions to protect that medical data. So that's another trend that I'm tracking, which is cybersecurity specific for hospital and healthcare data.
Which is already was a hot market, even getting hotter. I mean, cybersecurity.
Right.
You think about all the just then. And another one, is streaming. And that sort of ties in a lot. I mean, just you think about everything moving that way.
When you think about data as an asset, you know that it has to be protected. And so cybersecurity is going to continue to grow, but we have to keep abreast of those changes. We can't just say, oh, I'm going to sell to a cybersecurity company, because it's one of the most technical industries out there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you're interested, deploy a soundboard to start to listen, educate yourself, then ask a few questions, and then you can start to lean into those markets.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, I mean, it's an exciting time, because this is what I love to talk about anyway, but it's been so great. And I think, again, doing your homework, and you said this, and Sean and I, we talked about this, about it's also realizing you got to do a little homework. I mean, you can't, this is as you always talk about, because this is your background, or part of one of your seasons of your life has been around what do you call them, automated sequences, right? And this is a time which I wholeheartedly have always agree with, is that you got to do your homework. You still got to get to know somebody, and you got to have a little grit. You got to have a little perseverance. You got to have a little perspective here, and it's not about it just doesn't come easy, and you can't just have a bunch of, what do you call it, collateral damage, and just spray and pray, right? I mean, you can't. That just doesn't work.
If you're selling widgets and it's a transactional sale and you have an unlimited market, maybe. But if you're Ryan Staley, and you're closing, $50,000 deals, you need to understand not only the market, but the accounts and the stakeholders within those accounts. And that's a whole nother level, right? And you can get there. But Ryan Staley yesterday on a podcast said that 80% of salespeople are not making quota in these times due to outdated sales practices.
80%.
80%. Right? They're just hanging on for dear life, hoping that some economic miracle is going to, lift all boats with a rising tide. Instead, we should be developing our sales practices to be much more intentional around who the stakeholders and decision makers are.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're just trying to force a round peg into a square hole, good luck, but you might want to get an unemployment check in a month or two. If you're starting to look at market dynamics and decision makers, well, then your career is going to take off.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, great. Wow, this has been a great conversation. We got to have more.
I think there's a lot of people who want to hear this. So absolutely.
Yeah, let's find some new people to bring on here, and in the next conversations we can dig in more into some of these markets themselves.
Yeah, we can look at some agile market assessments for specific market trends in specific countries.
Yeah.
The kind of work that you're doing, and my little agile market assessment template makes it very easy, and we can bring in folks that are also doing similar work.
Right, and we're going to build some products together. So
absolutely.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks. Have a great day, Chris.
Thank you, Joe.
All right. Bye-bye.